Welcome everybody at this first session of 2021 of the Green Post Corona Talks. And I'm Dirk Holemans. I'm co-president of the Green European Foundation and coordinator of think tank Oikos. And it's always a pleasure to see that people from all over Europe are attending these talks organized by the Green European Foundation. And I really want to invite you to put your questions and so we can have a lively Q&A in the second part of this Green Post Corona talk. In this session, we will discuss the Common Agricultural Policy, the CAP, of the European Union, and focus on the latest developments and what they mean for climate, for biodiversity, but also for a fair agricultural policy. And to address these challenges, I'm very happy we have two very inspiring speakers. First, we have Bas Eickhout. He's member of the European Parliament for the Greens EVA Group and Vice Chair of the Environment, Public Health and Food Safety Committee. Next, I'm very happy to welcome Célia Nyssens, Policy Officer for Agriculture of the European Environmental Bureau. And first, Bas, I want to start with you because there has been a lot of debates on the Common Agricultural Policy, and you were also one of the driving forces behind two campaigns. First, withdraw the CAP, and then fix the CAP, which means that, of course, you are not very happy. And and though most people are aware that there was, let's say, a huge contradiction between the CAP approved and then, on the other hand, the farm to fork strategy of the Green Deal. And so, it would good maybe that you explain first why you did these campaigns, and of course now we are 2021. What will be the next steps? So, Bas, you have the floor.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Dirk, and indeed already on as part of those actions, you can conclude that we had some dissatisfaction over there. Otherwise, you would not call for withdrawal, right? I think what is basically the problem with our agriculture policies is that they are still dominated by a very conservative, old-fashioned, large-scale farming lobby. That's where it boils down to. And the most annoying part there, of course, is that people always, when they are lobbying, talking about the future of the farmers and they are very important. Well, I would say no one disagrees with that. What we are fighting here is a large-scale system that needs to change, where also the farmers have a much more central position where they can also profit from than what is now the problem, that they are really quite often a bit of a victim of a system that is driving you towards further large-scale farming. And that needs to change. So, unfortunately, until now, this large-scale farmers lobby, agriculture lobby, it's more the industrial lobby that is behind it, manages to put the frame as if it's we versus the farmers. And that, of course, is a fight where it's always more difficult to position yourself into, because that's not how we see the fight. The fight is really, do you want to change the system? Do you want to change our production system that we have built in Europe, and also including a better position for farmers who can then also make more money with a new system than what they can do now? I think that should be the battleground, but I am fully aware that we are not always yet successful in getting the right frame of that battle. And I think this is also at the heart of the discussion within the European Commission. When the European Commission published its farm to fork strategy last year, of course, we were having critical remarks on some elements. I think the most important there is that it's still very much focused on the production side, less on the consumption side. It's a bit of a classic problem of policymakers, right? Because, oh dear, don't touch the consumption. That's too sensitive. So we only talk about the production. By the way, with all the other decisions, we are impacting consumption always from every day, but we don't discuss it. And we only discussed the production side. So we were even critical on that element of the farm to fork strategy. But if you look at where the farm to fork strategy was focusing on, it had a lot of very good elements, which is really kind of feeling that there is a willingness to really think of a different production system here, which could be very good and is really very much focusing on what we Greens want as well. But then the problem was already, and we said that from the start to the Commission, if you talk about the Green Deal and you talk about a new production system and farm to fork, then you also should look at the heart of agriculture policies, the CAP, the common agriculture policies that we have, where we are deciding on where the money goes to, the European money goes to. And unfortunately, the Commission, fully aware of it, didn't dare to say, okay, let's rework the proposal on CAP reform. So what we saw was good ambitions on a farm to fork, but then a very outdated CAP proposal, which went into the legislative institutional work of both the Council and the Parliament. And see there that even there the institutions, so both the Council and unfortunately also the Parliament, even weakened that outdated proposal of the previous Commission. So then at the end there was only one thing left for us, and that was to say, guys, this is not providing us with a new agriculture system, and therefore withdraw it, which the Commission refused, and that's why we are now more in the phase, okay, if you don't withdraw, then let's at least fix it. And that's also a bit the reasoning for the change. I will stop here just on the contents very briefly, because that is, of course, what we will discuss further on, is what do we want there? What do we want to change? And I think there really it is going to be key, and I'm sure we will discuss that further, is how to make the system really sustainable, but also very important, really make it a fair system. And that element for us always goes hand in hand. It should be sustainable and fair, which means give the farmers the money in order to do different production, but at the same time also make sure that the money goes to the smaller farmers and not as it is now. Still, it's of the direct income support, 80% going to the 20% biggest farmers. That needs to change drastically as well, but I'm sure we will get to that discussion.
Okay, Bas, thank you for this already very interesting introduction. And yeah, maybe one question already. How did the Commission think that this CAP would be received? Because on the one hand, you're bold with the Green Deal, farm to fork, and then suddenly, this old CAP. What did they think? It was a kind of arrogant position, or?
I think in the end it shows there was a debate within the Commission. I do know that some people were in favor of really coming up with a new proposal, but in the Commission that is quite often seen as a kind of a very far-fetched option, right? To withdraw a proposal and come up with a new one. So they just didn't dare to call the shots there. I don't think it was arrogance. I think it was just they were not in agreement. And clearly, the more agriculture side of the Commission, they made the previous proposal, so it was not in their interest to withdraw it. And the new people now trying to get more into this agriculture policy making were a bit kept out of it, and therefore they didn't dare to be bold and say, and now we really take it serious. And I think they were hoping, probably against better knowledge, I would say, hoping that then the Parliament and the Council would solve some of the issues. Well, I mean, this entire battleground between agriculture interests and the more societal interest is in all these institutions. So it was a bit, well, to say at least naive to think that then the Council and the Parliament would do it. And there you see that the Commission knows very well that they can be influential, but when that sometimes becomes very important, they suddenly make themselves very small, like we are not the legislator, that's the other institution, kind of come on. You know that your proposal matters a lot, and they missed the opportunity there, but they just didn't dare to go against their own agriculture interest there in the institution, which in the end was the biggest problem.
Okay, thanks. Celia, you are following the CAP also very a lot of attention and very active. I think I'm happy to hear, let's say, two different things from you. First, of course, and that's maybe for later, I think the most important thing is how do we want to change the CAP for sustainable and fair agriculture and also consumer policy. but you're also in your organization very critical about, let's say, the lack of transparency, how these kind of decisions are being made, and you sent a letter together with other NGOs. So maybe as a start, we could put a light on this, that although they say we want public participation, involvement, in the end, it seems to be very processes with a lack of transparency.
Yes, absolutely. And this is something that I was going to cover, and actually links very closely with Bas, what Bas just said about this powerful lobby and the fact that you have opposing forces within the institutions and sort of power plays behind the scene. But if you allow me, I'd like to just start maybe by stepping back a little bit, and maybe I'll be repeating something that our audience already knows, but just to present a little bit what our vision is actually, because I think we're all aware of the problems, and so we all understand that there's a need to change, but what isn't always clear is change towards what? What is the alternative? And also here, there are different models being proposed with a huge push from different industries to go towards precision farming and what they call sustainable intensification, which is basically more of the same. And we want to be very clear that we don't think that is the right thing for us to do in Europe. In Europe, we have an extremely intensive system, which is having a very high cost on the environment, and we need actually to some extent intensify, so extensify our model of production, and move towards what we call agroecology. So it means basically farming differently, farming in harmony with nature, so using natural processes, ecology, biology, to support production. And we also see this as a more systemic change, which involves reconnecting food production with the local environment, so ensuring that there's a balance in what we produce and what the local environment can bear, but also reconnecting food production with local communities. And so it has a very strong social aspect to it. So ensuring that what we produce is actually focused on nourishing local populations, and not on trade or producing biofuels or making profit, but it's really putting people at the center and then working in harmony with nature. And indeed, we need very far-reaching changes to the CAP if we're going to support this sort of model of agriculture. Because at the moment, the money is just going to those who have the largest farms, no matter what they do from an environmental perspective. So I'm wondering what to cover next. I think I'll touch on your question, because it really is the core of our work is, how do we achieve change, and why is change not happening? And I was going to talk about two things, and one here Bas has mentioned is the power of vested interests. The fact that we have extremely powerful conservative agricultural lobbies that are very closely connected with agricultural decision makers. So whether it's in the parliament, in the council, or in the commission, those who decide the rules on agricultural policy have the same sort of worldview, I guess, see the sector in the same sort of way, and a very special sector, and are not willing to challenge the status quo. Of course, I'm making generalization, and there are people who are wanting to see things change. But by and large, people with power are trying to maintain the status quo. In some cases, because it benefits them. We saw in the parliament, for example, in October, there was some media reports about the subsidies received by those negotiating the reform of the CAP, such as, for example, the rapporteur, Mr. Peter Jaar. And then there's a second big issue that is linked to that, is the governance. And that's where transparency issues come into play, is that the way we make decisions is quite opaque. And it is also captured by those agricultural interests. So in the parliament, there was a big fight between the Environment Committee and the Agriculture Committee to try and it was a sort of a power fight. The Environment Committee trying to have a say on this policy, and the Agriculture Committee did not want to to give away their monopoly over this policy. We're seeing the same in the Commission, and this was the case on the farm to fork strategy as well. The DG Agri was not given primary responsibility for the farm to fork strategy. It was DG Sante, but they had to negotiate with them, and DG MV was also involved and responsible for the biodiversity strategy, which was very closely related. And there was a lot of power play there, and I think because DG Agri was not in the lead for the farm to fork strategy, we were able to get a very ambitious and transformative strategy, because there were new people thinking about this and bringing new ideas and challenging this status quo. And so transparency comes into play here, because, for example, in the case of trilogues, we have around the table the Commissioner for Agriculture, the now Portuguese Minister for Agriculture, and MEP Betoya, who is a farmer himself, who decide behind closed door on the future of farming in Europe, who decide on the rules for how 387 billion euros will be spent. This is crazy, and they're doing this without even publishing the agendas of what they are going to be discussing, without reporting on what they are agreeing. So citizens have no way to follow this discussion and to have an input to apply some scrutiny on this. So that is why we made a fuss about this, and we have not received any positive answers. The Commission, just like for the CAP, has told us this is not our responsibility. The negotiations are between the Council and the Parliament. The Parliament, the rapporteur in the Parliament has not replied to our request, and in the Council they have kindly told us that this was the way it was and it was not going to change. So this is extremely disappointing, because we can't achieve change as long as these vested interests are able to take decisions behind closed doors like this.
Bas, you agree with this analysis?
Yeah, and I think, I think what is very important behind this, this kind of this vested interest, it's really, it's almost this kind of the fundamental starting position. How do you regard this money, right? And it is by the agriculture side of the negotiation table, who tries to be dominant, it is seen as agriculture money. It's farmers' money. Basically, it's our money. So every rule then you try to change is seen as a hurdle to get to that money. So it's seen kind of like, but why are we making it so complicated to get to our money? And then if that's your starting position, of course, any change is bureaucracy, red tape. And therefore, if you hear the agriculture side of the table, the main words you hear is simplification, red tape avoiding, and all that kind of, that's because they have such a kind of a vision on this is our money. Whereas my vision or our vision here around the table is it's public money. It's people's money. It's taxpayers' money. And before we give subsidies to someone, like everywhere in each sector, we are absolutely in agreement that subsidies are needed in order to steer something. But then, of course, you only give that if you put the right conditions to it. You are having the obligation as a policymaker to ask for to steer the money where to go to. So these kind of two fundamental different insights on how you judge the money is very much determining this kind of battle that you see on all fronts between more the agriculture side of the table and the environmental side of the table, which is, as I started from, a pity, because I think it should not be this opposite. But of course, as long as you see the money in such a different way, we have such a fundamental discussion. And in order then to win the battle, you do your institution, you play your institutional role, and you try to keep it on your side of the negotiation table. And that's exactly what the agriculturalists are trying to do, to stay on it, because they know it's agriculture policy. So we have the competence. It's what the Agriculture Committee in the European Parliament thinks. It's what the agriculture ministers in the Council think. So it's their way to keep it on their side in order to know exactly what to do with the money. The only thing to break this is, of course, public pressure. Because I think if you go outside on the streets and ask the average citizen in Europe where they stand, I'm quite sure that they will be much more on the public money side, and we want to ask some reasons why we are giving the money. But of course, that public debate is not in the interest if you are in your little circle of agriculturalists deciding. And therefore, transparency is not in their interest. And in that sense, I think it's a good battle to take. But the fierce opposition is just because they want to keep the control of well, how you regard this money.
May I ask a naive question?
There are no naive questions, Dirk.
Well, okay. Of course, they have their vested interests, but at the same time, you would think that they are not blind, these people. They see climate change happening. They see heat waves in summer. They see now the resilience of the system collapsed with Corona. So in a sense, you should expect also some kind of opening for changing the system, because I cannot imagine that they are not aware that it's a kind of dead-end system, the 20th century industrial agriculture. And I don't have to talk, for instance, about the Dutch problem with nitrogen. We will have the same soon in Flanders. It's coming to an end, this 20th century industrial model. So are these people not kind of self-reflective a bit and open to some changes, or just blind looking?
You start.
Okay. I think it's that is such a fundamental question, and I think I don't know about the majority, but there are so many farmers who do realize this, who do want to change. But what is really tragic is that they are stuck in a certain system. They are very often indebted because they've had to invest in bigger sheds or in bigger machinery, or just to acquire the land in the first place if they are younger. And so they're stuck in this system. They're also stuck between, very powerful agrochemical companies, the likes of Monsanto, Syngenta, Bayer, who are selling them the inputs and advising them on how to use them, and maybe advising them on how to use a bit less pesticides, but not necessarily on how to phase them out completely, because that's not in their interest. And those tend to have a very strong position of monopoly on the market. So there is not necessarily somewhere else to go. And then they're also stuck between, on the other side, the supermarkets or the big cooperatives for the dairy sector, or wholesalers, processors, who also are much more powerful actors than the farmers themselves, and so are dictating the prices that they pay for producers. So you have farmers who are really struggling in many cases to make a living from the produce that they produce, because prices are so low, who are indebted, and who do realize, I think, that that the world is changing, that that the climate is changing, that their soil is getting unhealthy and and degraded, but they don't have a pathway or an extended hand to take to change, and that is where the CAP is so terribly failing them, because it is still just giving them painkiller, basically. So CAP subsidies are painkillers that are helping farmers stay afloat in this unsustainable system, but not helping them change fundamentally. And then there's another tragedy, which is that even though I think a lot of farmers do realize the need to change, somehow those that represent them in Brussels are fighting for the contrary. That's what we were seeing also with the leaked amendments to the Farm to Fork strategy in parliamentary report from Copa-Cogeca. They're even wanting to delete the reference to the food system having a negative impact on the environment and on health. What sort of head in the sand behavior is this? And I know for a fact that many farmers do realize it. So there is a disconnect. I don't know why and where and how this happens. But those who claim to represent farmers in Brussels do not necessarily speak for all farmers. And I think there is increasing discontent in this. I hear about increasing discontent. But again, farmers may not have somewhere else to go where they will be represented and will still have a voice.
Thanks.
I very much agree there, and therefore, Dirk, it is really not a naive question, because of course people see the limits of what can be achieved, but I think there are two fundamental problems behind it. One is indeed representation, where in the end you really need to wonder. Copa Cogeca, the big lobby organization in the EU in Brussels for the farmers, who is then representing the national farmer organizations, right? So it's a very hierarchical way of how the lobby is organized, where for sure you can tell that some of the smaller farmers in the different countries are totally not represented at the high level there. So it's the big players that are being represented, not the smaller players. And that is, of course, with in our farming system, one of the bigger problems. So that's a representation. So that's one. But secondly, and here I throw in a bit my Dutch experience in, which might be helpful in understanding where it goes wrong, because I think the Netherlands is a good example there. If you have built your system on a very highly intensified, industrialized way of production, and then you see the limits of the problems, then of course you can think, maybe this building that we have built is becoming so shaky, the fundamentals of the building are so shaky, maybe we should restart building. Or you can think, no, let's try to fix it, the building, and think along on what you built, and then think of some technical fixes to the system. And that is exactly what in the Netherlands is the prevailing sound until now. That is, for example, if you have a nitrogen problem, you could think, well, maybe it's a bit weird that we as the Netherlands are importing nutrients from all over the world, import them to the Netherlands, there we change it into manure, and then it's dumped on our water and our soils. Maybe we should change that. We should not be the global dump place of nitrogen. But that's a bit fundamental. What you can also think is, okay, we have the nitrogen here now, we have all the manure here now, let's try to find of ways how we can export manure and export the nitrogen again. And that is exactly the direction that they want to go to. And they then preferably, of course, get some input and get some money from Brussels in order to stimulate that innovation. And there you have...
Sorry, there's also a small extra innovation. If the Netherlands are full, just build your giant stables in Flanders, just across the border.
That's also a solution. That's also a solution. I think we prefer to keep it and only export nitrogen, of course. But if we need it, then we can also still export some of the farms. But it shows you that you remain in this kind of treadmill of technological fixes, and then through innovation get subsidies in order not to change the system, but just to more or less go on the same path. And I think that is the fundamental problem. So people see it, but they're not always thinking of the right direction. And on the representation parts, where of course the biggest problem is, and here really again, the farmers are there quite often the victim of it as well. If you have a very difficult life in order to get some profits from your work, right? And you have a lot of debt with banks who have been stimulating you to take debts on board to build higher stables and all that. So you have a large debt with the banks, and you don't make so much profit. If then on top of that, someone will tell you, oh, please, and the subsidies that you're getting, the painkiller that was mentioned before, we want to change the rules for that. Of course, you think, oh, no, not also that problem on top of it. Please not. So you see the problems, but they are so difficult to change that you only feel like now you are just making it even more complicated, my life. And that is usually also not a good setting to plea for a change in your production. And I think that is also why we as policymakers or the society really need to be more serious in, okay, we want to change the subsidies, but we also then really need to think of how can we make sure that the farmers have a stronger position in this production chain, and not what is currently the case, it's the supermarkets. They have the power in the production chain. They get the profits, not the farmers. And also that really needs to change. Otherwise, our story to the farmers is always incomplete.
Okay, I think it's clear that we now know some reasons why there's this kind of lock-in from different farmers, and of course also the big companies like Bayer, Monsanto. Let's have a look at this cap, which is now it's there, and so I think as we cannot undo the cap, the challenge is now fix the cap. So what are the main points that should be implemented to make it acceptable? Because of course we will never change it in a real sustainable and fair policy instrument. So what are the main changes that should be done? So, Célia?
Should I go? Yeah, sorry, I don't want to jump in if it's not for me. That is the question, isn't it? So I think first I'd like to just briefly introduce some of the 10 we published last week 10 tests on for a cap that would be compatible with the Green Deal. So I'll sort of explain that to sort of set the benchmark, but then maybe explain from a realistic point of view what we can expect. So in terms of those benchmarks, what we have identified as the key priorities, and so there were 10, but I'm not going to bore you with all 10 of them. I'll just focus on the 6 easiest and most important ones, or easiest to explain. One was that if we're serious about climate change, we should stop degrading natural carbon sinks that are on agricultural land. So the cap should ensure that there is strict protection for peatlands and grasslands, which are really important sinks of carbon in the soil that are used by farmers. So far, that is not going to be the case. Then second, if we're serious about stopping biodiversity decline, we need to make space for wildlife on farmland, because farmland accounts for around 40% of the EU land. So if we have no biodiversity on those 40%, we can't really solve the bigger problems. And so that means that every farm, as per the biodiversity strategy, every farm should make some space for pollinators, for insects, birds, so having flower strips, hedges, ponds, dry walls, etc., whatever fits in the local climate and local conditions. That is also very likely not going to be the case, at least not going to be compulsory. Then the third test that we set out was that we need to stop just channeling public money into harmful monocultures. So for farmers to receive subsidies, they should meet certain basic conditions, like doing a crop rotation, which is extremely important for the soil. Also protecting the soil in winter, so having some cover crops so that your soil doesn't all wash away when it rains on a wet February morning. And then having flower strips, again, so that the pollinators can be there and you don't need to use, and also natural pest control, so other insects can be there and you don't need to use as much pesticide. Again, the rules here are going to be pretty lax, so we can expect that the cap will continue to channel a lot of money to monocultures. A fourth ask or test that we set out was that the cap shouldn't be paying for intensive livestock farming. At the moment, there are still subsidies that are going to beef and dairy farmers, no matter how many cows they have. So they could have 150 cows in tiny sheds, which are polluting the local river and producing emissions of methane and ammonia, which are harming our health through air pollution. And there are no conditions attached to these subsidies at the moment. That can't continue. We need to have some rules attached to any money that goes to livestock farmers. Again, here we don't know yet exactly what the rules will be. In the Parliament, there were some potential improvements, but we will see if the Council accepts those. And then there's the big question of eco schemes, which have been and are being used by the agriculture ministers and more conservative MEPs to claim that the new cap is going to change the entire game and, is going to deliver on the Green Deal because they have earmarked 20 or 30% of income support payments for these eco schemes. But the problem is that they have also created all sorts of loopholes so that those payments could actually pay for business as usual, pay for marginal improvements to unsustainable systems. And that is just not good enough. We need to ensure that this green spending is really quality spending and is delivering real change. And then I'll give you a sixth test and then leave it to there. For the rest, you'll need to find our publication. But basically what we have now is a CAP that doesn't have a destination because there are no targets for it. There are targets on the side in the Farm to Fork strategy, in the Green Deal, in the climate law, in the Farm to Fork, in the biodiversity strategy, but the CAP has no obligation to deliver on those targets. And the only targets that member states have to set in the CAP have nothing to do with performance or impacts. So it means, how can you expect that the CAP would reach a certain destination when it doesn't have the tools together, it doesn't have that drive. So we really insist on the need to integrate the Green Deal targets that are relevant for agriculture in the CAP. Now, these are all, I think if we were to see that out of trilogue, the Parliament and Council systematically leveled up on their ambition, so took the best of both positions, we could probably get about halfway to these tests. The problem is that what we are seeing in the trilogues is that from the information that we get, they are rather going for the lowest common denominator. And so we are going to be a world apart from this. And then the focus will be on the national level, where national plans will have to be developed. And there it will be absolutely crucial to have this big mobilization that Bas talked about, to ensure that in national ministries, they actually try and do something good with the tools that they have. They will have extreme flexibility, so they could use it for bad, they could also use it for good. And that there will be a big role there for civil society and for the green movement in every member state to push for higher ambition at that point. And that is happening now, actually. I'm talking in the future, but this is happening this year in 2021 and has already started.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, maybe picking up on there, because I think indeed, what is the positive thing of all this is that for the first time ever, there is really much more a societal discussion on the CAP. That always has been put like, oh, this is a very technical discussion, right? By the way, as soon as you hear a lobbyist say this is a technical discussion, what he means is stay out of it, don't interfere, because that means I can't get my way. That's when a lobbyist calls it something technical. So this is just a tip for everyone. As soon as a lobbyist is going to start with, this is a technical discussion, okay, pay attention now. He tries to get out of it. He tries to get out of public scrutiny. And that is for the first time not working now. There is public attention, and I know the NGOs have been trying for a very long while get this public attention. It was very difficult, but finally, unfortunately, when the bad decisions were taken in the council and the parliament, there was suddenly a very big outcry of people saying, what's going on here? Don't people learn from the mistakes from the past? Basically, the questions you asked, Dirk, a lot of people asked them, like, well, how is this possible? So I think that public scrutiny is now much better. So that is already good. That's the good side of it. Unfortunately, we have two not so good positions. I don't know.
Someone ringing my bell.
Is that your bell? Okay. Probably some agriculture lobbyist is entering the door now.
So I will leave you 30 seconds, but just go ahead.
That's all right. I'll just continue. So it feels a bit weird now, but okay, we just continue. Where now it is very clear that the public scrutiny is there, and so the decisions were not that brilliant of the two institutions, but at least indeed let's try to make it as good as possible, and that's exactly the test that you talked about, where we can judge that upon. But I think, to be very honest, and this is when you said, well, even if it goes in the right direction, we're halfway. That might be a bit of an optimistic estimate. I think what we really need to do now is putting pressure already on the next step, because you're absolutely right. We can still improve something in the negotiations, but the real test is, of course, going to be with the implementation. And there, two institutions are going to be vital. It's, of course, the member states. They have to make their national strategic plans. So let's make sure that those plans are serious, and more serious than they have to, because the European rules allow you to go further. They are putting the minimum demands there. It doesn't mean that a country cannot judge for themselves to say, yeah, but we want to go further than those minimal rules. So every country, Belgium, Netherlands, each country can say, no, okay, these are the minimal rules of the EU set by them, but we want to go further. And that is all still possible. So there's where the public pressure should be on the member states. And secondly, on the European Commission, because the European Commission, and let's be fair to them, they really have become much more active and in a positive way. So they also already published guidelines on what they feel that the eco schemes, right, this kind of this separate box of environmental measures that countries can get money from. By the way, we still need to fight whether that's 20 or 30%. There's a difference between the parliament and the council still. But okay, the size is not fully decided yet, but the commission is already giving guidelines to say this is what we understand as an eco scheme. And those guidelines are pretty okay already. So you see that the commission is trying to push the member states in a certain direction. And I think we should keep on making sure that the commission keeps on doing that, so that countries feel the heat to go further than the minimal demands from the EU. And I think that's now the basic game that we need to play as well. Last point, CAP is not the only tool we have, of course. It's a very powerful tool because it's where the money is, and whether we like it or not, but money talks. But of course, you can also just put legislation there. Very simple example. If we look at the farm to fork targets, where, for example, we want less use of pesticides, of course, you can stimulate that with your subsidies. But unfortunately, as said before, the rules are very general and very, very unclear there. You can also just make a law. We want less use of pesticides. A strict law can also be there. So also here the Commission, if they also realize, okay, we missed the opportunity with the CAP subsidies, they still have another portfolio of instruments they can use in order to steer towards the farm to fork targets. And that we should not forget either, and should keep the Commission under scrutiny there. So it's not lost. We can still do a lot of things, but yeah, we did miss a bit of an opportunity there in the CAP reform, of course, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks. Célia, you mentioned in one of your 6 tests biodiversity. And I must say, when you observe the European policy, I think this is one of the big changes, that this Commission is really wants to be serious about biodiversity, if you compare it with the former Commission. So I think also maybe there are more possibilities than just the CAP to, make the agriculture system change, or is this too optimistic?
It's hard to say. I mean, there are, of course, other opportunities outside of the CAP. I mean, I'm thinking, for example, of the revision of the Sustainable Use of Pesticides Directive, which hopefully will include this target on reducing pesticide use. Pesticide is one of the big drivers of biodiversity loss. Then there is an upcoming restoration law. So this will be a law setting binding targets for restoring degraded ecosystems. But it isn't clear yet if that will include agricultural land, or if it will be on the outside of agricultural land. And if it does include agricultural land, what we could hope there is then to restore some crucial ecosystems like semi-natural grasslands or some peatlands, for example. But it will probably remain quite small in terms of scale, of geographical scale. Whereas what we really need is to stop the large-scale loss of insects and pollinators, butterflies, etc., which is driven by this lack of habitat on agricultural landscapes. Not only that, but this is really one of the major drivers. And here, if the CAP doesn't do it, it's hard to see what else will. At least in the work program that we have of the Commission, there aren't other legislative proposals that will really drive this change forward. But we can try and use all the tools we have, and there is potentially also some help that could come from the climate angle, because a lot of measures that are beneficial for biodiversity can also have climate benefits. So, for example, replanting hedges could count as, it's a way of afforesting in a way. You're planting woody biomass on the edges of fields, etc. So we could hope that through ambitious climate targets that would drive some change, but time will tell if these things add up. But our prognostic is not very very optimistic on this.
Yeah, I also would like to. I would say here on biodiversity, what the biggest danger is that we are getting so tired of fighting this agricultural vested interest lobby, right? That what we do is, okay, then we put the biodiversity policies next to it. So we are going to increase some of the protected areas in Europe, and we are going to be very happy with that. We are going to do some agricultural set-aside lands, and we're going to fight over the percentage, how much that will be. And then that will be the very big fight, and we win a percentage, and then we solved it. And I think that really needs to be careful, because the pressure of our agriculture system on our natural system is very big and needs to change. And you don't change that by even more separated two systems, here biodiversity, there agriculture. No, the future is really an agriculture system that works in sync with our natural system. And that needs to happen. And that is this more fundamental change that we are pleading for here. And I'm sometimes a bit afraid that some of the people also within the Commission are getting a bit tired to fighting that system, and therefore fighting for a bit more biodiversity protection. But that sounds nice, but it's really not the solution. And I think that is our biggest battle that we still need to have, also within the Commission.
So, sorry, that's what you just explained is sometimes called the eco-modernist position.
I knew you would come with that. I knew you would come with it. Yeah.
We even intensify our industrial agriculture, then we can save land, and then we have more room for natural expansion. I know, for instance, in the Netherlands, they're not strong, but they are influential. So, how are they also active at European level, or it's more at the national level, these eco-modernists?
We don't call it that as far as I'm aware, but yeah, it is.
They call themselves like that.
It's the land sparing approach, I guess. You spare land by intensifying. Supposedly, you spare land, but actually, what you do is you make it possible to either grow more crops that you feed animals, or to grow more crops that you feed bioenergy producers. It doesn't work like that. It's not because we have produced enough to feed ourselves that we then stop using the rest of the land to produce and use it for nature.
I have the impression it's a narrative that in public debate with people not so much informed, they get some support. So therefore, I think, and you mentioned it in the beginning, Célia, we really have to insist on the alternative, agroecology. And I have the impression that there's a growing movement of farmers, scientists, and groups in civil society that are, talking and working about agroecology, more farms working on this principle. So I have the impression it's something growing and becoming stronger.
Yeah, but can I say here, because this is also something where the green movement should be careful about, is that, of course, when you are going into a setting of agroecology, of course, there will be people misusing that terminology. So it's a bit like sustainable development. I don't think anyone can be against, but at a certain moment, everything was sustainable development. And of course, you do see some companies stepping in agroecology and claiming that term, that they are also working for it. And therefore, I sometimes see the reaction in Greens to say, oh, and therefore we should not go into agroecology, and sometimes even, and let's stick to organic only. Which I think would be a mistake, because I really think that agroecology gives a new opportunity, it gives new chances, but that means we also need to fight politically to explain what we mean with agroecology and go into that discussion. And yes, there will be people misusing it, but confront them. Don't pull back out of that territory and then leave it and being taken over by parties who basically do the same but still call it differently, but really go and confront them, because I do think that we need a system next to organic, because that's then kind of where you fall back, right? That you have organic as the only green solution. I think that would be a mistake from our side. So I think also here, strategically wise, we as Greens need to be clever there, I would say.
Yeah, because of course, in an organic farm, you still can exploit workers.
It's possible.
Delivering the lowest prices for the supermarkets. So,
yeah, there are rules at least. So that is the positive thing about organic farming, is that it has been codified in certain practices. But of course, then there are still, and there has been an emergence of more, what one could call industrial organic farming. And for example, in wine production, then there's quite high use of copper as a natural pesticide, which is then actually polluting soil. So there are issues with it. And it is true that this could happen to agroecology as well. But the good thing with agroecology is that it has been defined by the FAO according to 10 principles. There's 2 different ones. There's also one with 13. But in any case, somewhere the work has been done to define what agroecology is, and it is a very strong definition. It includes the environmental dimension, but also the social dimension of using local knowledge, of connecting producers and consumers, etc. And so we need to just fight for that definition and not let the term be hijacked by other interests, indeed, because that happens to every word, every term that we come up with eventually gets hijacked. And it doesn't help to just keep moving from organic to agroecology to something else. We need to stick with this one, because it is really a very well designed, I mean, agroecology works. That's, I think, the message that we need to get out there. And it is scientifically grounded, and there are already a lot of farmers applying it.
Okay, thanks. I think the last word hasn't been said on the CAP and agriculture policy, but so who knows? Another time we have a second session of this webinar, which is coming to an end. I really enjoyed talking with you. I think we discussed a lot of topics in less than an hour. And to end, maybe Bas, it's good to ask you a bit about the coming month, because if you look back in December, a lot has been debated, decided at the European level. We have the multi-annual financial framework. We have more ambition on the field of climate policy. We have now United States stepping in again to the Paris Climate Agreement. So if you look to the coming months, what is your expectation on these topics and challenges like climate policy?
Oh, that's a lot, Dirk. But very briefly, I think, because linking it still to the agriculture discussion, right? I mean, the CAP reform will be concluded the coming months. On some issues, we know that the results will not be super impressive, but there are still a couple of issues really open. And for example, the capping, what we also said, it not only needs to be green and sustainable, but it also needs to be fair, and therefore a kind of a credible capping how much maximum of subsidies per individual farmer you can get is still a very important battle. So in that sense, still look at the CAP reform negotiations, because a couple of things are still very needed. Then in June, there will be a monstrous package of climate legislation coming from the Commission again, which will include also how do we deal with land use accounting, because more and more the target setting is not only in reducing the emissions of greenhouse gases, but also increasing the sinks of green. So, and there, of course, again, we will have a debate on the land use system because of that. So I think that package will also give us an opportunity again to do credible accounting of real increasing the carbon sink of our European land. And there agriculture plays a part. So I think that is going to be a very important battleground there. It's called LULUCF for the nerds in the audience, but that's going to be a very important file for this debate. And then the third point, and there I conclude then, is there's not only in fall going to be a very important climate summit in Glasgow, there is very likely also going to be a very important biodiversity summit in China in fall. That's also being postponed for a year. Let's see whether it will continue. We don't know exactly how things will develop, but let's assume that also continues. It will be very important in a global setting to really become more credible on biodiversity as well. And as I said before, not looking at biodiversity as, okay, we increase protected areas and then we're done. No, also the pressure of all our systems on our nature systems. And there again, in that global setting, that global biodiversity summit becomes a key moment for the future of our nature. And let's hope that we can create a bit of a Paris moment for biodiversity this year on that global stage. And then I hope we can bring that pressure from the global setting back to Europe to rediscuss real farm-to-fork measures. So in that sense, it's all connected, and you're absolutely right. There's still a lot of ahead of us, even this year still, yeah.
Okay, thanks on both. Thank you very much. Also, Célia, very informative. I remember your 6 tests. So the coming months, when I hear something about CAP, I will check whether these tests are okay or not. And so thank you very much. And to the public listening, glad you are with us. And I want to already invite you for our next session of the Green Corona Talks. It's February the 23rd. And then we have as central guest Petra de Sutter, which is the Vice Prime Minister for the Greens in Belgium. So I think also, again, a very inspiring talk. So many thanks and see you next time.
It was my pleasure. Thanks a lot.
It was a pleasure indeed. Thank you very much.